you've attended many events, and for many of you, this might be your first one as well with Boston EdTech. So just to give an overview of kind of what we're about here. So we kind of, our user-facing side is really the Boston EdTech Meetup. That's how a lot of folks find out about us, but really we have a nonprofit behind that just to make this a little bit more sustainable process. And the Boston EdTech Foundation, kind of our mission and our theory of change, our real goal on the right-hand side is to help EdTech companies create products that meet the needs of diverse learners. And we think of our meetups as a way and our events as a way to help do that. So one type of event you'll see very often from us is more of a networking event where we try to connect current EdTech professionals with folks of diverse backgrounds. And then the second piece, of course, is to help create a community to discuss the latest EdTech research and products and trends with folks of diverse backgrounds. And we believe by helping folks connect in that manner, we can ultimately create a workforce that better reflects the learner population, and as a result, also create products that meet the needs of diverse learners. So that's our ultimate goal. Obviously, that's hard to measure, but again, this is just kind of our theory of change and how we think about why we organize these events. We generally run 3 events per month. They kind of trickle in as we go, but if you're on the Meetup group, you'll see them now. Our next one is focused a lot on kind of a very local talk, which is about teachers and advisors and one school particular take on it. So that's our next event. But you'll see a variety of events ranging from networking to more speaker panels like the one you all see tonight. The Boston EdTech Meetup is sponsored by Curriculum Associates. So historically, we've been an in-person meetup until a year ago or so when we've gone virtual. So if we were in person, there might be some food, there might be some things like that. But now that we're virtual, people have to provide their own food. That's fine. But hopefully when we get back in person, that'll be another thing. But obviously we appreciate our sponsors, and that's kind of a year-long commitment type thing. I'll share these slides in the chat right after I finish, so people can feel free to take a look. Ways to stay connected. We do have a Slack channel where people can kind of connect asynchronously, even outside events. We have a Twitter and then LinkedIn, which we're kind of spinning up again and getting going. The last thing we've been kind of playing around with a little bit is of kind of a very hyper local job board as of now. So this is pretty Boston specific for now, but we kind of just kind of tracking what roles are available and jobs as they open them in the Boston community. Because again, our ultimate goal is to help build that diverse network and diverse workforce. So it makes sense for us to try to play around with it. Very early, we've just launched it 2 months ago, so we're still looking for feedback. So if folks are interested in looking for careers, check it out, and definitely offer feedback as you see fit as well. That's all for me. So Lucy, I'm going to turn it back to you to actually get this event going.
All right. Before we welcome our speakers today, Robin, would you kindly share the results of polls so we can see who are in the room today? All right. I guess people can share the results. So it seems like we will spend a lot of time talking about growing learning design skills as well as emerging technology today, as people are very interested in it. About half of us are already in ID or learning experience design positions. Actually, noticeably, 10% of us are in the teacher position. So it might be something that we can touch upon a bit later in our conversation. Half of our audiences are in mid and senior level, and about 40% are junior and entry. So just the panelists can have an idea about our audience today. Yeah, all right. Without further ado, I'm sure we're excited to meet our speakers today, Alex, Audrey, and Julie. Let's welcome all of them on the stage. Okay, let's begin for everyone. Okay, first of all, welcome to Boston EdTech, the global edition. To kick us off, maybe let's start from Audrey to share a bit about what you are doing right now, what your team is doing, and yeah, let's get started from there. Audrey, and then you can pick Julie or Alex from there.
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm Audrey Espy. I'm a lead learning designer at Udemy. So for those of you who might not know, Udemy is a global marketplace where anyone can create and sell a course online. And then we also have Udemy for Business. So companies purchase Udemy subscriptions to provide online learning to people at work. So my team at Udemy, the learning design team, sits on the learning team, which is really this center of excellence within Udemy. So for all things learning. So we really do a lot from focusing on working with instructors to guide them through the process of creating Udemy courses in tech and business skills, and providing them with learning design guidance and best practices. And then we also do some, product consultation, working with our product teams to help them understand, how can we grow and evolve our product over time to really improve the learning experience on Udemy. And then also working with customers on the Udemy for Business side, helping them to use Udemy to create learning programs for their employees. And so it's kind of a fun job in that way, and that we get to really touch all different parts of the Udemy customer lifecycle. That's me. I'll pass it to Alex.
Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you all for being here today. It's so great to see so many instructional designers and learning experience designers and aspiring teachers. My name is Alex Sarlin, and I'm the Director of Product for the Learning Experience for the Skillshare platform, which is actually a competitor to Udemy. So you can see us going head to head today. I've been in educational technology for many years now, at a number of different places. I was at Scholastic and Coursera and Newton and 2U. I've sort of been all around the block with adult and K-12 learners, and I just love the profession. I'm a EdTech lifer, and I'm so happy to be here and to share any knowledge that I can with all of you wonderful folks. Oh, let me kick it to Julie, the legendary.
That's all right. Hi, my name is Julie Dirksen. If you're familiar with anything, it's probably a book I wrote called Design for How People Learn. One of the things that, which came out about 10 years ago, but the purpose behind that was that so many people come to instructional design or even learning technology and so forth through domain expertise or sometimes technical expertise. And so it really seemed like there wasn't a great kind of first book for instructional designers. If you were just getting started with user experience, somebody would hand you Don't Make Me Think. Or if you were just getting started with graphic design, it would be, the non-designer's design book, or there's a couple of those. And so it really felt like we needed one of those for instructional design, because so many people are kind of that accidental instructional designer, the, hey, you're a good customer service rep, we're going to let you train the other customer service reps, or, hey, you're a good whatever, web developer, we're going to have you teach this class on web development. And so so that's what I do a lot of now. I'm an instructional designer from way back. That's still how that's still how I identify, even in this age of learning experience, whatever. But I spend a lot of my time kind of actually doing workshops and things like that now, because what I'm frequently trying to figure out to do is how do we sort of move forward as a field in terms of having, I think, better guidelines to work from. There's a lot of old school stuff that's really useful, but then I think there's a lot of things that we can still get better at.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots to talk today. So how today will pan out, we'll have about 45 minutes to have conversations between the few on skill development for learning experience design, emerging technologies, and just what is happening in the industry. And then we'll say 15 minutes for a Q&A. So audience, while you are listening to the conversation, feel free to type down your questions, and my colleague Robin will pass it to me later in the QA session. So be active and we'll have your question highlighted. All right, first question. So we've heard so many titles, from instructional designer, learning experience designer, learning engineer, instructional technologist, yada, yada. What do you think those titles really mean? And in your experience of being hired and hiring others, what advice you have for people to even how to approach these titles? Everyone is lifelong EdTech professional here. Maybe let's start with Alex.
Sure, I'll give my quick ideas about this. So instructional designer is, I think, the classic name for the title in the field. Just like Julie said, it's been around for quite a while. The master's program that I went to at Teachers College is called Instructional Design, or the program is called Instructional Design and Technology, and it's been around since I think the 60s. They were literally teaching overhead projectors in that program when it started, and it was still called instructional design. So that's a really, that's the original term. Learning engineering, I know a little bit about because I was briefly at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, and they are the sort of big champions of that term. It's a term out of Carnegie Mellon. The Herb Simon said, someday we should be learning engineers because that's like taking very seriously the data side of it, and really it should be a serious profession, so it should be called an engineer. And they've been trying to spread that. And I actually took it seriously. My last role, my title was actually Director of Learning Engineering, which I made up. I told them that was the role I wanted because I was trying to spread that name. It has not caught on yet, as anybody may. If you go look at learning engineer and you're in a job post, you're not going to find very many things. Instructional technologist, in my experience, tends to be more within systems, like within school systems. Julie can correct me if I'm wrong on that. And then learning experience designer, I think, is just sort of a flashier, updated name for instructional designer. I think they're basically synonymous in my experience, but I might be wrong. That's my overview. But you could put all of them on your resume.
Yeah, I'll pick up the LXD thing, which is a really interesting topic to me. I've been, I've been trying to figure out what it is. I tend to agree with how Alex just summarized it, which is it's shinier. It's a shinier name for instructional designer at the moment. I've seen a number of explanations for how, the sort of difference, and none of them have been super persuasive yet. I would say that I think there's some real value to looking at the overlap between things like user experience design and instructional design. I think there's some big core competencies in user experience, and specifically the ones that I usually kind of focus on when I'm kind of talking about it are things like user research, prototyping, and user testing. Or testing, not necessarily even just user testing, but the ability to kind of test your solutions and get feedback on them and things like that. I think there's actually a bigger piece to that. And so if we're talking about LXD and it doesn't have any of those competencies sitting in it, I tend to be kind of skeptical of it as a title. I'm not persuaded by we focus on experiences, because I have as yet to meet anybody that's can really explain to me what that means. But I've been interested in that overlap for years. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm sure several of the things I'm going to say are make me sound old, but and I'm going to lean into it. I registered Usable Learning as my website name in 1999 because I was specifically interested in that overlap between usability engineering, we didn't even really call it UX yet, and learning, and where do those things kind of overlap. And so I still think there's a lot we can do with that, and a lot of ways that we can bring that into the field. I was actually super interested in what you just said about learning engineers, because I've been wondering about that one. But I will say that big picture, one of the things I'd love to actually see happen is a little bit more splitting up of roles. So learning analytics, I'm starting to see pop up as a job title. I think there has been a tendency in the last, probably 10, 15 years of kind of taking things like developers and instructional designers and content writers and now learning analytics and all of these kinds of things, and sort of just continually bloating the responsibilities of what the instructional designer is supposed to do. And some of it comes from the focus on rapid authoring tools, because when I first started doing a lot of e-learning in kind of like the early 2000s, I always worked with a team. I always had a developer, I had a graphic artist, I had a project manager, or I was the project manager. Sometimes I split those roles, but I had, there were several people that were working on these projects. And now the expectation seems to be that like an ID should be able to do all of these. And I'm not happy about that, because I think it comes from an unfortunate place, which is because we've had a hard time establishing our value, we get treated as a cost center in a lot of organizations. And the thing you want to do is reduce costs. So it's not an investment thing where we want to expand it. And that may be different in the world that Audrey and Alex are coming from, because your business is actually creating learning products. And so it's a different, I think it's a little bit of a different value proposition. But if you look at internal companies, the L&D group inside, you know, inside FedEx or something, I'm making, you know, pick big company name and insert there. But there's this, I think, this tendency to want to reduce those costs, because it's not seen as a kind of a capital investment, but more of a cost to reduce and things like that. And that's caused this sort of over focus on make the instructional designer do all the things. So anyway, I'll pass it off to Audrey at this point.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is an interesting, timely question for what we're doing at Udemy. We're called learning designers at Udemy. I've had different titles at Udemy. I've had different titles in previous companies. And I think the core question that we're really focusing on as a team right now is we're actually creating like a role charter, a code of the learning designer, and really defining for ourselves, you know, what do we do? What's our value? What's our philosophy? What are all the things that we can do? And in an effort to make that clear, not just for ourselves and well documented for ourselves, but also for the company, so that to Julie's point, the company really understands the value that we provide and the ways that we can help other parts of the company. I think, especially at a place like Udemy, we obviously want to really advocate for the importance of high quality learning design and quality learning experiences and how we can really focus everything in our product and the way we do things on that. So that's really what we're doing. So I think kind of the key is less about the title and more about making sure that what you do is really well defined and that the company knows that too and understands your value. And depending on where you work, the title might be really important to that. I think, you know, Alex, your point about engineers is really interesting. Some companies, I think designer is like way more sexy and cool and interesting than engineers. I worked previously at Autodesk, and they really call themselves a design company. And so to be a designer of any kind at Autodesk was a very important thing. And so it kind of depends on company culture as well and what your own company really values.
Yeah, lots to break down there. So it sounds like it's not only about what you call yourself, but also, you know, how this role or title is perceived by other teams in certain organizations. So I would like to ask for the labor to like try to break down the hierarchy of learning design competencies or skills right here with all of you, because you mentioned quite a lot. Who would like to take the first step?
Ellen Wagner did a really nice one. Oh gosh, it's probably 7 or 8 years ago now, where she looked at like the big buckets kind of that were existing within instructional design. And let's see if I can remember. She had 4 kind of main things. One is that kind of that sort of classic instructional designer, which came from kind of an educational psychology perspective. There was really this sort of technology piece. So that often came out of multimedia development, you know, so the people who are making the instructional videos or, you know, things like that. And then there was, I want to say, kind of the content writing and things like that. And oh, you know what, I'm going to, when somebody's answering, I'm going to just take a quick look and see, because I'm blanking out what the 4th one was. But what's the name? Ellen Wagner. Yep. So she kind of, you know, did some breakdown on that. And then Jane Bozart for the eLearning Guild did a piece. She did a research report a few years ago where she looked at kind of, I don't think she used the term bloat, but I think it is a little bit of a bloat in terms of the job responsibilities attached to instructional designer and kind of how many additional things came into it. And so there's really this like figuring out what the learning experience should be, which is, I think, that sort of traditional instructional designer. There is like writing and creating all of this content. There's the programming and development. And now we really do have also this question around the learning analytics piece. You know, how are we collecting and using data data for things. So I'm gonna, like I said, I'll look it up while somebody else talks, but
Yeah, maybe to put it in a bit more practical manner. So some of our audience ask, like, if now, as entry level, for entry level people, what are some most essential skills and qualities they need to really develop a very strong foundation going into this profession?
one thing I will say is that that any answer that we give has to be couched in terms of, if we're talking about workplace, it's one set of answers. If we're talking about higher ed,
Right.
it's a very, very different set of answers. And certainly if we're talking about doing like instructional design or curriculum design for K-12, that's yet another set of answers. So anything we would say about that has to be put into one of those frames.
Yeah. Go ahead, Audrey, please.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, I think one of the key skills for me in my career that I think is foundational to any career, even outside of learning design, but is super key to learning design as well, is just project management and relationship management as well. I think even just beyond the design skills, so much of our work is often working with others. And helping subject matter experts distill their ideas into a course or a learning experience. And so the ability to do that and to manage that relationship, and there's quite a lot of, honestly, like emotional intelligence that needs to be developed to do that. As well as just the project management and knowing, where everything is in the process, and what are you doing, documenting your work, all of that is super important. And I think that often learning designers can work in a silo, and it can be kind of a lonely job where you're just sort of working alone on your project. And so one thing that I really appreciate about my team at Udemy is that we are a very collaborative team, even though our projects are pretty individual and we're kind of working on our own thing often. We still come together weekly. We share ideas, we share goals and objectives, and we share like a similar process that we're constantly iterating on. So really, I'd say like a key skill is just that desire and ability to collaborate and constantly be improving your work and learning and being creative in your thinking around that. So I know those are really difficult, broad skills to develop, but I think those are very important, and like the kind of technical aspects of everything can always be learned.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I just want to springboard off what we've been saying so far, which is, I think that in my experience, the instructional designer role is extremely different based on whether you're working within, as Julie said, a higher, a university, doing L&D within a company, working within a school district, or working within a technology company. They're really very different roles. And one of the things that you see a lot for ID entry level positions within companies is articulate storyline and storyboarding. And if you think about what they're really looking for when they list things like that, it's like you're going to have to take a document and convert it to a online training, or you're going to have to talk to an expert and physically make and write and produce and maybe make video and be sort of a one-stop shop to create content. That's very different than working within university, and in my experience, which is, with university, you're helping instructors and professors, and depending on what kind of university, but you're doing a lot of technology support and trainings and helping people put their courses online, working with subject matter experts, working with, that's a really very, very different role. I mean, there are subject matter experts on both sides of that, but they're very different kinds of people. And, you do a lot of training. Companies like Udemy and Skillshare and edX and, places like that have a sort of parallel version of that, where you're teaching instructors how to teach, you're working with a product to make the assessments better, to make the learning experience better, but you're not, it's sort of a twist on the university one in that you're doing it at a certain kind of scale. So like I would imagine, I know that for Skillshare, we have 30,000 plus classes on Skillshare, and there's 1,200 new classes coming every month from a community. So what do you do in that situation? You're certainly not sitting with anybody and teaching them about, ADDIE, or you're not sitting and teaching them about instructional design principles. You're trying to create systems that when somebody walks in, they have to do the right thing. So for example, the Skillshare classes all require a project. They're all hands-on courses. You literally can't publish a course without a hands-on project. And we review the projects to make sure that people are actually learning by doing, which is like core ID principle, as we all know. So they're just different variations. And when you think about where to go in the sort of hierarchy, I don't know. I mean, I don't know that it's a real hierarchy as much as what I'd recommend to anybody who's breaking into the field is look at the job descriptions in the field and try to sort of decipher what they're really asking you to do. Are they asking you to make content or work with subject matter experts or build a system or work within a giant CMS like content management system? Or because you can really tell a lot from the descriptions about whether they need you in an office making things or out on the road or just giving webinars or seminars to people. Is just wildly different. That's not, I mean, I know it's a squishy answer, but it's really true. It's a very diverse field.
Yeah, it's kind of a meta role in a lot of ways. You sort of have to approach your own work like as an instructional designer. You have to think about it in that way. What you were saying, Alex, about designing systems to like help people do the right thing at scale was particularly struck home with me. That's obviously something we think about at Udemy, but I think just even your point about looking at job descriptions and really understanding like, so what is the objective? What are the gaps? What are they trying to get out of this? And just kind of living that mantra and that lifestyle.
Yeah, absolutely. Every problem has its context, and it's really important to kind of understanding the job and the work. One thing I find it curious, and I haven't heard much today, is I saw a little bit on the chat, is like, what about the background in psychology and learning sciences? It seems like kind of like contingent for any kinds of learning. Is that a required skill or background?
Well, it certainly should be. Whether it's always present, I don't know, but I feel like that should be the, whatever flavor of, because we've talked about a lot of different ways this can shake out. And I did look it up. The fourth kind of area or domain that Ellen was talking about was kind of that business acumen piece, sort of, I think it's partially what we used to call kind of performance support, but, like how do you support business goals and how do you understand how your, things fit within it, which I think is actually a really important kind of additional sort of area of competencies. But I do think the core thing should be an understanding of, basic principles about educational psychology and about how people learn and what create, like one of the big challenges, and again, it was something that I was trying to address when I was writing the book, is that there's a lot of making it look education-y. That happens, like, oh, you're the customer service rep who's now training the other customer service reps. You're going to make it look like other classes that you've been in. So you're going to have a PowerPoint deck and you're going to stand in the front of the room, or you're going to create an e-learning and you're going to have an X button, whatever. But if you don't understand some of the underlying goals of what you're trying to do, you can make stuff that looks just like all of the other training, but isn't accomplishing very much. And so if you don't kind of have some of those foundational things, I think bad things happen then, but including a lot of unfortunately wasted resources and wasted, learner time and things like that. So.
Yeah, it's great to see in the chat so many educational psychology and learning theory fans. Just reflecting, I'll just very brief off what Audrey said in the last question. I think when I'm looking to hire an instructional designer, or when I'm interviewing people for any kind of learning role, the three things that I look at are the two she said: relationship management and project management. Can you manage your time, juggle multiple things? Can you work with a variety of different kinds of people about content that you might not know much about and they know everything about, and still be a good partner to them? And the third is an understanding of learning principles, but not a desperate allegiance to learning principles. I mean, I think that to reflecting what's been said earlier, we know a lot more about learning than we did 100 years ago, but not as much more as you might think. And I think, if anybody who sort of comes in saying, I know how learning works. I mean, they don't. Nobody knows how learning works. We're all learning it together as a species, literally. And so I have a few go-to principles that I bring. Feedback, sense of belonging, the testing effect, a few things that I pull out of from Julie's book, from a lot of other research and books over the years, that are sort of, I love self-efficacy theory. Everywhere I've been, I teach everybody the self-efficacy theory, and it just opens people's eyes. A few different core things that I sort of bring with me everywhere. And then with that in mind, you look, and every situation's wildly different. You have different kinds of learners. They're coming for different reasons. You have different technologies. You can apply the same principles to them, right? Assessment, just passively watching something isn't going to get you that far. We do know that from a lot of studies. So when you go to a place that's all video based, you got to push for assessment and project-based learning and things like that. And that'll happen over and over again. I've done that at 3 or 4 different companies. So it's like, what I'd recommend there is, for all that you learning theory, motivation, all Pinterest, all those amazing theorists, like, have your folder of ideas that you love, that you're in love with, you want to teach, you really, really believe, and then carry them with you and talk about them in interviews. Most people don't know them, even ones that you might find basic, you maybe learned 5 years ago. They've never heard of them. So bring them in interviews, show that you know them, but then deal with the situation at hand. Don't say, no, we can't do that huge product that you want to do. You can't teach that class because you're not doing enough, formative assessment. That doesn't fly. You know what I mean? You have to be flexible.
Yeah, I think totally agree. I think often people are going to ask people to like wave a magic wand and create some perfect formula that's going to address all learners, but it just doesn't exist. We often hear like, oh, gamify this, make a leaderboard. Like, okay, so that appeals to like a certain percentage of learners that are motivated by competition, but what about everybody else? So I think having an understanding of just humans are complicated and you have to consider their motivations and their backgrounds and in your creation of your learning experiences.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And lots of people are asking for book recommendations. Be sure to share amongst yourself, and maybe we'll circle back for some recommendations later. Next question is kind of like from learning designers from all stages of career. Take UX designers who code as an example to be unicorn designers. What do you think about, like, should instructional designers, pick up graphic design, pick up coding, and all of the kind of more technological side of content and training development? What tools should we learn?
I think from my perspective, I think graphic design would be really helpful to learn. I wish I knew more graphic design. I think you can kind of learn the basic principles and some key principles is very useful. One skill I think that is growing, and it's very important with Udemy, but maybe less so in other places, but also is video production. And what do you know about making videos? I think that is a big one. You just see like how much the quality threshold, the bar for videos is really high these days. Even like YouTubers are creating these extremely highly produced videos. So that would be an area that I think is a good one to develop in.
Yeah, and I think
like you don't have to know how to like operate a camera necessarily, but if you like can understand like what is a camera operator doing, like shot composition, lighting, that sort of thing, that's helpful.
right. And it's sort of, both Alex and Audrey pointed out earlier, it's such a diverse area that like you can play into your strengths to a certain extent in terms of when you're looking for a job. If you like multimedia production, so video or like doing graphic design or any of those kinds of things, there's definitely roles where you will get to do a lot of that. There's also instructional design roles where you don't do any of the graphic design, where you work with a graphic designer. Personally, my preference, because when I do graphic design, it looks like an instructional designer did the graphic design, which I've made work a lot of times. And I would absolutely 100% agree that like anybody should have a certain, because there's going to be those days where you're putting together the PowerPoint deck and a little bit of graphic design goes a long way in terms of making stuff. There will be times where, yes, you're the one doing it. But I think the answer is to lean into your strengths and things like that. Like, what do you want to be doing? And then, yeah, you want a portfolio or, something like that, that shows that stuff off. I think it's possible you can't 100% exclude it. Like I'm certainly not a technology person per se, but all of my technology background helps me kind of have conversations with the technology people, and a certain amount of business knowledge helps you have conversations with those people. I'll find it someplace. I did a kind of, other skill domains that instructional designers should speak. And it was things like UX, business, a certain amount of technology, a few other things, just because you're going to need to kind of interact with all of those groups. So even if you can't necessarily do it really well yourself, it really helps if you know what to ask for when you are working with somebody.
100%. I like the comment in the chat about writing. I have found that writing is in many contexts, writing is a really valuable skill for instructional designers. You have to write content in many places and jump in and sort of play that hat in a lot of ways. You also have to write to people. You have to write specs in certain cases, or you have to document how a management system works, or just being able to communicate really clearly. I know that's a soft skill that's used everywhere, but it's especially useful for instructional design because you're truly trying to communicate both to your learners and often to an internal team at the same time. And one that has not been mentioned that I've found incredibly over my career, I've realized I have to learn more and more and more, and sort of coming back to, is actually data analysis, is analytics. I think we're in a really crazy moment in EdTech where it's growing like crazy, huge, and even small companies or small universities have unbelievable amounts of data to crunch, and there are patterns to find. It's all in these databases. You have to learn how to do SQL queries or work with business intelligence tools. It's something I don't think I would have said 3 years ago or 5 years ago, but it's now almost everywhere I've been. It's not that they won't necessarily hire you if you can't, write SQL, or you can't, do a visualization. But if you can, you just break right through, and you can make a huge difference immediately. And you don't have to rely on other people within an organization. You could say, oh, I pulled the numbers and I realized that students who do this also do that, so we should focus on that. And it's like it's a huge differentiator in my experience.
Yeah, there's going to be more learning analytics roles, and there will be people qualified to fill them for the foreseeable future. So if that's something that you like and that you're good at, that's a really nice area to lean into.
And yeah, I would also second what Julie said. If you are a multimedia type person, lean into that. If you like graphic design, lean into that. I'm not a big data head, but I've had to lean into it more. But I do think that, and that's what's so fun about this field. You wear different hats, you do different things on different days. Yeah. So, T-shape as always, right? Go deep on a couple of things and try to really be amazing at a few things and decent at a lot of things. It's really important.
Yeah, if we move along kind of further on the technology spectrum, we also have been noticing that artificial intelligence and immersive technologies like mixed reality have been kind of beginning to the field of learning and education. So should we learn about those tools as well? What's your thoughts?
I can start. I have a couple of ideas about
Sure, go for it.
So, so I know we have somebody in this call who does virtual reality instructional design. So yeah, it is a nascent field, but a pretty exciting field, because you can imagine it's immersive instructional design. Put people in a situation, have them learn by doing. It's like simulations squared. It's just very niche right now. There's not that many. There's a few companies doing it. They're just getting money.
Beautiful.
No, Yeah, I spent some time in, with the Oculus. So the Facebook Oculus is trying to figure out how to do learning through their VR too. And I think there's stuff on the horizon, but as of right now, I haven't seen anything where I'm like, this is the thing. This is the, the next. I think it will come, but it's not quite here yet. It's coming though. So if it's your interest, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, the cost of development in VR is still really high, and also one of the big issues that has cropped up that I think that people aren't giving enough credit towards is the issue of where people are doing this in an organization, like physically, literally, like where do you go do your VR training or things like that. And because it's, we sort of think, oh, it's just the headset and that's all we have to worry about. And the answer is no, like the physical environment that somebody's in, whether that's facilitated, like some of those things are really hard. And so the places where I've seen it cropping up are places where the value proposition is significant. So a colleague of mine works for a company, and like the devices that they're working on cost millions and millions of dollars. I won't get into too specific, but I mean, these are technologies that are enormously expensive. And so having devices that people can practice on is not a small issue, like, because you've got to fly people places and because they're so expensive. And so getting any time on these things is a big, big deal. And so the investment that they've put into VR training absolutely makes sense, because even if it costs quite a lot to develop it, the value of not having to like let people practice on real equipment or even mocked up equipment. I mean, like the physical, they can have physical mock-ups of this stuff, but getting it to behave right, all that kind of stuff is really complicated. And so that's still the place where I'm seeing a lot of that. I did a research report for the Learning Guilds a little while back on behavior change applications for augmented and virtual reality, because I was really interested, aside from these issues where it's either costly or really dangerous to train people in kind of real life conditions and things like that, which are usually the really obvious use cases for VR. There's some interesting stuff around kind of visceral experience when it comes to behavior change, but I do think the cost of developing for that is still going to be a barrier for a while. It'll get cheaper and there will be more people, and game development is fortunately building a lot of the environments that we're going to wind up using. But I think it's just the cost and the amount of effort that goes into development is still going to be something that's going to slow that down for a while.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much to add to this particular topic. I will say when I worked at Autodesk previously, I was more on the K-12 side. They provided free software to schools from K through university, and it was pretty interesting just to see how much, especially in the elementary school space, people are starting to focus on design technologies and CAD and the coding aspect of that, but also the physical manufacturing aspect of that. And so I think that's potentially an interesting technology area even to look at, like 3D printing and the kind of physical maker spaces. Some of that doesn't even seem like new technology in a lot of ways, but the ability for people to get hands-on and make things is seems to be trending, especially in the K-12 space.
Yeah, I mean, the last thing I know I would say and will say about this is basically that, one thing over the last, 10 years in EdTech, one sort of meta trend that I feel like I've noticed is that the time between when a sort of a new technology exists and when it's being used for education has shrunk a lot. It used to be that, there was all this talk about, how will we ever use mobile phones in education? How will we ever use iPads in education? Like, even, the digital divide, people would say, can we even use the internet for education in schools? And I mean, you look at those conversations now and it's like, Absolutely, you can. There are, you know, hundreds of mobile learning startups. The whole country just moved to virtual learning for the last year. Like, you know, so I would say I don't want to be the person on this call saying, oh no, you know, AR VR is not ready for prime time yet. A guy, Chris Dede at Harvard's been talking for 15 years about, or 10 years at least, about augmented reality, and it never takes off. But maybe it's coming now because the time, you know, schools and universities are getting quicker to adapt really new tech. So it could
Yeah,
be.
well, augmented is an interesting one too, because you know, and I think that augmented will break through too when we get to wearables that just work better, you know, that are just that they can do more with it. But I was having a conversation with Chad Udell, who does a lot of kind of forward-thinking stuff in terms of technology in learning spaces. But he was sort of saying that a lot of the augmented stuff that he was seeing that was really interesting wasn't getting run through L&D. It was through ops, you know, and it was through solving a really particular problem rather than, hey, we've got this tool, you know, this tool, what can we use it for, kinds of conversations. And so I think there will be some of that as well. I mean, because augmented is potentially got an enormous amount of promise, but you know, there's still this issue of like, when is there going to be a wearable technology that's genuinely easy to work with that way? And it's coming. It will happen. It's just, you know, more, you know, like Google Glass was supposed to do it, and of course it didn't. But you know, there will be a better version of Google Glass at some point, and then that will probably break through quite a lot with that.
Yeah, Chris happens to be my advisor, and it's really interesting to see, you know, the crazy stuff that he was doing last century, literally, and how much the technology has progressed. But again, expert like him would emphasize at the end of the day, it's like, you know, what is the objective, what is the problem that we're solving, less of how cool the medium itself is.
Yeah, you know, and it's funny because I was just looking up some of Christy's stuff like 2 weeks ago, I think it was, because he's got some really nice stuff on technology scale for learning. And he's got, you know, kind of thought through some of the frameworks for that. And that's been one of the big issues, because the part about scale has focused very much on like information delivery. But to what Alex was talking about, that like, you know, just the information isn't enough and you have to practice and things like that. That's the part where scale kind of gets to be an issue really quickly, because it's easy to scale simple feedback in the form of computer graded like multiple choice assessment or something like that. But as soon as you get anything more complex than that, then scale and feedback don't work very well, which is a big part of the reason why higher ed is so different than workplace. Workplace tends to be a lot of self-study materials, or, you know, I mean, it varies. Sometimes you could be creating a lot of decks for webinars or whatever. But the issue of like, so there's been a basic frame for most educational technology that like the actual atom of learning is a piece of information, and that's not great. I don't love that, because I really think that a much better frame for educational technology would be that the basic atom would be a learner action with feedback. And that feedback, once you move beyond the really simple feedback that a computer could provide, that gets expensive really quickly. And I mean, the MOOCs were looking at things like peer-to-peer feedback, because that was a way that they could scale feedback without it, you know, without having to pay people. Higher ed has a built-in assumption most of the time that there's a human being facilitating and providing feedback in those, you know, in those systems, which is why instructional design is really, really different in higher ed than it is in workplace. And so those are all things that we're working on. I'm actually going to have a conversation with you, Alex, at some point about how you're doing the feedback on the project-based stuff for Skillshare. I'm actually super interested in that conversation. So.
Yeah, we all feel that this conversation needs to go on and on. But in the meantime, we also have lots of questions from the audience. So let's try to get as many as possible. And feel free to type more questions, and Robin will pass them to me. So first question, how have you come across the difficulty of pushing for learning science related stuff at your team? If so, how do you do that?
I think probably that's a resounding yes from everyone. Especially, it's funny. I mean, you know, I think the cool thing about working at Udemy is everybody really cares about learning, and we're all working on a product that's all about learning. But then the kind of finer points of that, and the more complicated points of that are where our team is trying to push. And so I think what's difficult is sometimes we have to be the ones that say, like, slow down, wait a minute, let's think a little bit about this. And people want to move quickly. And so I think just kind of really focusing on what's important. What is the highest priority for you? What do you think is going to make the biggest impact? And really sticking to that message is helpful.
Julie and Alex, thoughts?
You're muted, Alex.
I was the first person to talk while muted. What can you repeat the question? I just wanted to make sure I'm getting it right.
Yeah, how do you promote learning science at your organization?
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes. Amazing question. And it's really tricky. And it's something I have actually been really deeply involved in at a lot of places. And one thing I really love to do when you can is either create reading groups. So people who are all reading the same thing. We actually did a reading group for How People Learn, which is basically a textbook at Coursera. And it was pretty amazing. We had a lot of people reading that entire book. You can also bring speakers in. And something I recommend highly there is grad students, because there are incredibly brilliant graduate students in learning design and education and psychology and educational psychology who have a lot to do, but one of the things they would love to do is go share their research and go share what we know about the field. So they're pretty easy to book compared to other people, and they know everything. Another is sending out. So the reason I'm so comfortable sending out a reading list is I have a reading list that I've given to people for years for instructional design readings, and I keep updating it because nobody knows where to start. As Julie said, there are not that many good introductory books. Hers is one of the best ones. It's always on my list. And what I'd recommend is, it's very easy to overwhelm people who want to learn about learning with like 20 serious books or all these papers, but it's great to find a couple of articles or just find some sort of entry level. I mean, this is just basic learning design, right? Entry level, quick win ways to get to, so people feel like they really learn something quickly instead of sort of overwhelming them all at once. So chunk it out. I love doing presentations about like how memory works, or just like little things where people are like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. I want to learn more. And then, let them come to you for more rather than dropping the bulldozer of books on them, even though that's always what I actually want to do.
We also are actually currently doing a reading group for Julie's book right now. So
Nice. That's great. Yay. Yeah, you were sort of talking about promoting it in your organization. I am my organization. And this is kind of what I do, is to try to figure out how to promote it in other organizations, for lack of a better term. But one of the big things that I realized is, when I went to graduate school, we learned our ADDIE, right? Analysis, design, develop, implement, evaluate, and all that kind of stuff. But one of the issues that I really kind of found as I went through this is that there wasn't much kind of connected pathways between analysis and design. So if you know this about your users, or you know this about the material that you're trying to teach, what does that actually translate into in terms of design recommendations? So that's actually what I spend a lot of my time doing, is trying to figure out, how do I take some of these things that I know, because typically the way people get to be good instructional designers is they try a lot of stuff, and then if they're really fortunate in their organizations, they have some kind of feedback loop so that tells them what's working and what's not working. We don't have enough feedback in e-learning typically. It's really that's a whole another hour on the history of kind of why that happened. But that's probably the single biggest recommendation that I tend to put out there for instructional designers, is figure out how you're going to get feedback on what you're building. And there's some really quick and dirty and simple ways to do it. You can just do user testing where you watch somebody go through a program, an e-learning program that you've created. Because I'll sometimes ask the question, if you've ever taught live classroom, have you ever not made changes to your class between the first time you taught it and the second time you taught it? And the answer is, I've literally never met anybody who wouldn't make some changes and some tweaks based on what they learned the first time that they taught it, but to the second time or multiple times that they've taught something. But we typically don't have that cycle in e-learning. It typically gets built and then it gets loaded on the learning management system. And all we know is if people are finishing it. Is frequently the only piece of data that we're getting out of it. And so the biggest thing that I really, really, really strongly encourage people to do is to figure out, how am I going to get feedback that tells me if what I'm doing as a designer is working or not working? And we have this thing where we lean heavily on this idea that we have to have proof. Like, I have to know that the whole audience did it. And the truth is, you don't. I mean, that's great if you can get that data, and that's where the learning analytics comes in and some of those kinds of things. But honestly, even if all you're doing is going out and talking to half a dozen users after they've taken the class and had a conversation about what their experience was, that's still more feedback than most instructional designers get about what they're doing. And so the question of how you do that, which is totally answering a different question than how do you promote learning science, but the question really is, how do you kind of continuously improve at what you're doing? And so the learning science can absolutely help you with that. We were recommending books. Another one that I've liked in the last few years is Clark Quinn's book about, it's like Goldfish Millennials and Other Myths, I think should be roughly the title. You'll find it if you look for that. Look for the Clark Quinn Goldfish book. But trying to kind of, I think any field probably gloms onto myths, but we do it a little bit because we're just not getting kind of enough other things that we can hold to as practice. So I spend a lot of my time trying to figure out what are some reasonable guardrails that we can do. So if you ask a question like, is it reasonable to think that a learner can be proficient without practice at this particular task? Or how quickly do they need to be able to use this thing? Are they going to be able to use a reference? Like, really simple kind of things that if you ask this question, that's going to help. Is it something where it's like hard to tell if it's right or not, and an expert sort of says, it when you see it? Like, there are learning principles that can follow from that, and so being able to kind of surface some of these guidelines and help other people with them is basically what I spend my time doing. So
cool. We're a little bit over time, but multiple people have asked question about, for career growth, is it worth pursuing a master program or graduate certificate? I hope to get some of an opinion from you. And it's both for early career and mid-career people.
I can start. I don't have any kind of formal educational background in instructional design. I am what Julie would refer to as an accidental instructional designer in a way. I started my career in textbook publishing around the time when they were like, we should figure out online learning. And that gave me an opportunity to work on some products that they were creating for that, and get to experience that instructional design side of things. And I really liked it. I felt it was a complementary kind of skill set to editing in a lot of ways. This idea of kind of like curating people's ideas and like packaging them up nicely so that they're more understandable. And so everything I've learned has been on the job. And so I think, but I've also been really fortunate to have really, great managers and mentors and colleagues who do have more formal instructional design backgrounds who I have learned from, including, my manager has a PhD, several people on our team have masters. And so it's great to learn from them. So I think, it's so hard to say. I think a lot of it is on the job experience, and just as, kind of to my point earlier, like so much of our jobs is not necessarily always about the theory, but about like the project management and the relationship management and all those just businessy work kind of things. But definitely having that foundation of instructional design knowledge is very helpful. And if you don't have a master's in it, you might have to be a little more ambitious about chasing that knowledge yourself, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I would build on that. I mean, I think most of the people I've worked with in instructional design do not have a formal certificate. Some do. There are a set of master's programs that are sort of considered the like, the sort of top tier gold standard, places like Harvard, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, UT Austin, there's a number of places like that, but it's hard to give recommendations for education because everybody's situation is so wildly different, right? And with instructional design, it's good that it is a field that is not totally limited by credentials. People can get into it from a lot of different backgrounds, from video backgrounds, from teaching backgrounds, from lots of different ways. So I definitely wouldn't say that the field demands a certificate, but there are also certificates that will open doors. I wanted to say that there's a new program that I don't know much about, but it's at Boston College, so it might be relevant to this group, which is it's the first Master's in Learning Engineering at Boston College. It just launched, I think, a year ago. So that might be something interesting to some people here if they want that sort of take on it. It's sort of a data-driven instructional design. Indiana Bloomington is very famous for its ID programs, but like that, yeah, it's a funny answer because like there are programs that if you go there, you will meet lots of other people in the field. The professors will be great. NYU is one of them. And it gives you a great springboard. That said, you do not need that to get into the field. And especially now, there's a lot of, there's a University of Illinois has an instructional design degree online through Coursera. There's certificates. There's all sorts of certificates. There are independent practitioners and consultancies that offer really amazing training. So it's a wide open field, and I recommend that anybody looking to become educated in it sort of treat it that way. Look at the different, consider the value props of spending tens of thousands on a master's degree versus 3,000 on on an online certificate versus learning on your own with books and doing an adjacent career move and learning on the job. They're all viable paths.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I really don't think you need an advanced degree to work in the field. Again, it kind of comes down to what do you want to be doing? So somebody with a lot of like, say, multimedia skills can absolutely get a job someplace doing that kind of work without having, a master's in instructional design. Or, people come up like, sort of Audrey was talking about from the content side and, content development or things like that. In workplace, I would say that probably the majority of people I deal with don't have advanced degrees. And I would also say that an advanced degree is no guarantee of quality in an instructional designer. Because I've had experience with the full spectrum on both sides. I know some people who do have advanced degrees who I think are not necessarily doing great work, and I know some people who don't have degrees who do great work, and kind of all boxes in the quadrant on that one. But so yeah, I certainly found it valuable. I certainly think that one of the issues when you're going into any field is learning to speak the language of it. And so even if you don't do a master's degree, figuring out some way to kind of understand what those expectations are, what what all of that looks like a little bit is worth doing, even if it's certificate courses or some of those kinds of things. And I haven't actually looked at that particular Coursera version, but that could be a perfectly good way to kind of get your head wrapped around some of that. Honestly, that's partially, those are useful skills. And, there's always a little bit of gatekeeping around some of that kind of stuff. If you're in a job interview and you can't talk to, your process for learning objectives or something like that, that's going to be a problem. People are going to be like, but oh, you can edit video? Well, maybe we'll still hire you because that's what we really wanted. So again, it just depends.
Yeah. Thanks so much. It's been such a great conversation. And we will definitely compile all the recommendations and share out later. So I hope to invite everyone and just express a genuine thanks to 3 of our speakers today. Yeah, so you were excused, but you're also welcome to stay, because as a tradition of Boston EdTech event, we always reserve some room for networking. So Jeff, do you want to explain how the breakout room works?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I think you can hear me. Okay, yeah, I just saw my video pop up. Great. Yeah, so again, like Lucy said, speakers, thank you so much for the event. Feel free to stick around if you want to network, but obviously it's been a long day for everyone, so feel free to drop off at all as well. We'll do some random breakout rooms. So I see people dropping off. If you're interested in just meeting a few of the folks on the Zoom call, one of the tough things about being virtual is you don't get that after, event kind of networking or even prior event networking type thing. So if you just want to meet a few folks who are on this call, there seem to be a lot of folks passionate about learning experience and instructional design. Feel free to stick on, and then we're going to just give it like maybe a minute or two, and whoever is around, you're going to be thrown into a breakout room about 5 or 6 random people for you to say hi with. We'll time it for about 8 or 10 minutes, depending on how the conversations are going. And then we'll bring it back, and then we'll try to run it again if there are enough people around. If there aren't, then that's cool too. But just so everyone gets a chance to at least meet a few people, because we know networking is a big deal of, breaking into the profession. And, it's just a big reason why people come to events, right? Whether they're in person or virtual. So, all right. Again, if you don't want to participate, I'd recommend you sign off now. Otherwise, you'll be thrown into a room randomly. But if you do want to stick around just to meet a few folks, feel free to do so as well.
I'm going to stop the recording now, so we're not recording during breakouts, and I will create the rooms in 1 second.